All right, welcome. Excuse me, welcome to this week's Facebook Live. This week we're going to cover autoimmune disease basics. It's always a little bit awkward at the beginning of these videos because I know once I go live, it takes a second for people to click on and to log on if they're going to jump on. But at the same time, the video saves for people that want to watch it later, so I don't want to start the video with a bunch of dead air. So I'm going to talk for a couple minutes here. I will say that this is our second Facebook Live. They're going to be weekly every Wednesday at 6:30 Central Time. So if you missed the last one, it was on heart disease, you can go back onto our Facebook page and you can watch that. Tonight, I'm going to cover autoimmune disease. This is kind of a two-part presentation, though. If you didn't join us last week, what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk for about 20 minutes. It is my guest. I'll talk for 20 minutes. Then I'll sit down and answer any questions and answers if there are any. But like I said, this is a little bit of a two-parter. I was putting together kind of everything autoimmune disease, and it was just a lot of stuff. So this week is on autoimmune disease basics. Next week, we're going to dive into autoimmune disease causes and solutions and really talk about what you can do if you have an autoimmune condition. Now, today we're going to talk about that for sure as well, but next week we're going to really dive into some science. So autoimmune diseases, the reason that we're doing this is because autoimmune diseases are an epidemic today. There's over 100 now named autoimmune conditions, and they're discovering more and more diseases really have an autoimmune component to them. And that is because if you've ever heard of inflammation, like inflammation is at the root of a lot of our chronic 21st century health conditions. Well, inflammation is an immune system response. And so what triggers that immune system response? Well, as they continue to discover these different pathways and discover all these connections, they're finding that it's really an autoimmune trigger. So they're putting, different diagnoses. They're saying, oh, these have an autoimmune component. Alzheimer's has an autoimmune component. Et cetera, et cetera. Even autism has an autoimmune component. Now, so the goal tonight is to teach about how autoimmune diseases begin, what kicks them off, some of the basics, some of the triggers, some of the fuel on the fire, and some of the things that you can do about it. But next week, make sure you tune into that one as well. If you haven't already, sign up for our email list. With these weekly Facebook Lives, we're going to start sending out our emails on Mondays and include some things in them for the Facebook Live. So some of these images that are up here on the whiteboard, they were included in this week's email. If you don't have them, it's okay. But for next week, make sure that you sign up for our email list. You can get to that through our Facebook page or through our website. Sign up for our email list, and we'll send out some images. I do want to start by saying that this is not medical advice. I do work with clients, both locally and virtually, have some virtual clients, but this isn't that. This is for educational purposes only. I'm just educating you on autoimmune diseases, so it's important that I throw that disclaimer in there. So before we turn to the whiteboard, let's talk a little bit about autoimmune. And I said it slowly on purpose because that word, autoimmune, what that literally means is that the immune system is attacking your own body. Your immune system has lost the ability to distinguish between what's called self and non-self. And that's pretty self-explanatory. Your self is you. It's your tissues. It's your body. And non-self is anything that's not you. Food, metals, other things that are just foreign. They're called xenobiotics. They're foreign to the body. Well, your immune system has lost the ability to tell the difference. It doesn't know what's you and what's not you, so it begins attacking you. It's supposed to attack foreign invaders, but it begins to attack you. And autoimmunity is an immune system dysfunction. That's really important. That's what we're going to dive into a lot next week, is how to balance the immune system. But autoimmunity is an immune system imbalance. That's why if you have autoimmune disease, a lot of times the pharmaceutical solution is going to be an immunosuppressant, suppress your immune system. But rather what we're going to talk about next week is different ways that you can balance that. But your immune system begins attacking you. So heading over to the whiteboard, your immune system begins attacking. And what it does, it attacks. Okay, attacks. What it will do at first is it will actually attack your food. And I'm going to explain that in detail next week about how leaky gut happens, but it's what's called loss of oral tolerance. Your immune system will begin attacking food. It will begin flagging food as foreign invaders. Then these flags, through a process called molecular mimicry, can get put onto your tissues, and your immune system begins attacking your tissues. So with the 100 plus different autoimmune conditions that are out there, they're just different names for how the immune system is attacking the tissue or where it's attacking the tissue. So some of the most common ones that are out there, let's say it attacks the thyroid. Well, that's called Hashimoto's if it's hypothyroid, or it's called Graves' disease if it's hyperthyroid. But it's the immune system attacking the thyroid, causing a malfunction, which eventually, you know, at first when the immune system is attacking, you don't notice that. You can go years, you can go decades with the immune system attacking a tissue until you begin to notice it. So it can begin attacking the thyroid, that's Hashimoto's or Graves' disease. It can attack the brain or the nervous system. It's something called myelin basic protein, and that's multiple sclerosis. So if it's attacking the myelin of the nervous system, you're going to get lesions in the brain that will show up on your MRI that will be diagnosed as multiple sclerosis. But that's an autoimmune condition. It can attack your joints. So it begins attacking the joints and eventually will destroy and wear those joints out. What we're going to get to in a little bit is that attack and that inflammation and how it actually does lead to tissue damage, irreversible tissue damage. But if it attacks the joints, that's going to be called RA or rheumatoid arthritis. If it attacks the skin, that's going to be eczema, that's going to be psoriasis. Vitiligo is another one where it's going to attack the skin. That's commonly known as Michael Jackson's disease, where you get the discoloration of the skin, and that is an autoimmune attack on the skin. It can attack the gut cells and create inflammation of the gut cells, creating irritable bowel disease or irritable bowel syndrome, IBS, or Crohn's disease or ulcerative colitis. Really devastating autoimmune conditions where the immune system is, for whatever reason, attacking the gut cells and causing those gut cells to be very inflamed. And then it can attack the pancreas. And these are just a few examples that I pulled off the top of my head. But if it attacks the pancreas, especially the beta cells of the pancreas, it will lead to type 1 diabetes. The beta cells will no longer be able to produce insulin, and you'll be diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, which is a really serious thing. So that's what autoimmunity is. Very basic. Your immune system has lost the ability to distinguish self from non-self, and it's begun attacking your own tissues. The questions that you need to ask are why and what caused it. So that's what I want to go into next. So for an autoimmune disease to happen, and this is, I'm going to use this drawing up here as an illustration, but this is pretty well accepted in the scientific literature, that is a three-legged stool or a three-pronged cause of autoimmune disease. So if you understand the concept of a three-legged stool, the point is that it won't stand if it's missing any of the three legs, right? So if it has to have all three legs for it to be able to stand, or else it just doesn't work. So that's the point of this illustration, is that it has to have all three of these. Now, to a certain degree and certain, it's not saying that everybody has the exact same proportions of them, but every single autoimmune disease has to have these three legs of the stool. So leg number one, I should mention too, a couple of the feedbacks that we got last time, which were really great. I mentioned at the beginning, last time was our first Facebook Live. This is our second. A couple of the feedbacks were to use darker marker. The green didn't show up very well last week. Another feedback was that we just covered a lot of information and that people's heads were spinning. So that's why I split up this week's talk and next week's talk to make it a little more digestible. We had some other really, really good ones. We worked on the lighting. We did some things. So if you have any comments or feedback, please feel free to share them. But I'm using a different colored pen because of that. But the first leg of the stool, the first necessary leg of the stool, and if you downloaded or got the email, you have this image already. But it is your genes. Okay, that says genes. So your genetics. And your genes do play a role. Now, it's really, really, really important to understand the concept of epigenetics. And that means that all of us have good genes and we have bad genes. And you and I both might have genes that predispose us for autoimmune disease. And let's say mine are better and yours are worse. You have worse genes than me. You have more high-risk genes, but you lead a better lifestyle than me. Well, your lifestyle pulls the trigger of those genes. That's what's called epigenetics. And before I even talk about this, that's really, really, really important to know, because your genetics are not a death sentence. Just because you have bad genes doesn't predispose you or guarantee anything. And in fact, I just did a podcast episode called Interpreting Your Genetics. It's how to run something like 23andMe and how to get good answers, good health data from your genetic reports. So it is something that's really interesting to dive into and learn what genes you have and what genes you don't have. But you have to keep in mind that your environment is what pulls the trigger. But your genes for autoimmune disease can absolutely predispose you for it. So if you're a woman and you're 40 and your mom has lupus and your grandma had rheumatoid arthritis and your sister has Hashimoto's and your brother has Sjogren's, your risk is certainly higher. And there's a lot of genetics that you can dive into in there, especially genes on the HLA-DR chromosome are higher indication for autoimmune disease. And there are others out there. Genes, like I talk about in the podcast, that I have a gene that predisposes me more towards celiac disease. And all that means is that they've studied large populations of people and found that the people that had celiac disease tended to have this gene more. So your genes have to be a part of it, though. They do certainly predispose you. But like I said, they raise the risk a little bit, but you could have the best genes in the world and be doing everything wrong, and you're still going to get autoimmune disease. So the genes are a part of it. Also, your genes are the one that you can do the least about. So you just kind of have what you have. But your environment, you can change the epigenetic factors. So I really don't want people putting too much weight, too much pressure into their genes. Number 2 is really important, though, and that is your gut. That's the concept of leaky gut. Every autoimmune disease begins with intestinal permeability, or what's called a leaky gut. That's well established in the literature. Dr. David Perlmutter, a famous neurologist who's a gut health expert, he wrote the book Grain Brain and then wrote the book Brain Maker, and then he's got a new one coming out pretty soon. But he said, how do you know if you have a leaky gut in America? He said, well, if you have a vowel in your name. So I like to tell that to people to just illustrate that almost everybody has a leaky gut to some degree. And what the gut does is it's what separates the outside environment from our internal environment, where our immune system's at, where our bloodstream is at, etc. So we want to keep the good things in and keep the bad things out. Well, when the gut gets leaky, the bad things can get in. And that's when the immune system says, whoa, 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 foreign invader, we need to attack, even if it's just something as benign as a food protein, but the immune system doesn't recognize it. So it begins to attack food, and then eventually it's going to attack tissue. But the gut, really, really important. Next week, we're going to go into a lot about leaky gut. And that's a layperson's term. The scientific term is intestinal permeability. But leaky gut, I mean, it makes sense. Why change the name when it makes sense to everybody that's watching this? But it is technically intestinal permeability. But that's leg number 2. And then leg number 3 are your stressors. Okay, and that's also called your, I'm not going to write it because it's too long, but your environment. Okay, and so your environment along with the gut. So the gut is what allows the permeability to let things in and create the immune imbalance, the stressors can trigger the genes. So all three of these, you have to have all three of these in just the right combination, or just the right, like, perfect storm right here, that right in the middle, when they all three overlap perfectly, you're going to develop autoimmune disease. I want to spend a little bit of time on these stressors real quick, and what those mean and how that happens. And this is an image that was from the email. So you got the stool image and you got the bucket image. Or if you were at our last live event, not Facebook Live, like actual live, you saw this bucket. And your body is like a toxic bucket. And these are these stressors. And when you talk about stressors, we have physical stressors, we have mental and emotional stressors, and we have toxic chemical stressors. We have thoughts, we have traumas, and we have toxins. And those include things like, let's see, a drop of the bucket. Let's say, let's say your foods. Could be a stressor. Let's say BPA from your plastic water bottles, a known trigger of autoimmune disease, BPA. Let's say we have heavy metals. Let's say we have a breakup with your boyfriend. Let's say we have, you get in a fight with your best friend and you have a big emotional stressor. Let's say, something terrible happens, like your house gets wiped out by a tornado, right? That's like a huge, huge drop. And as you're filling this bucket with these stressors, let me add, let's say you have an auto accident. Let's say you sit at your desk at a desk job. These are physical stressors. I don't want to skim over the physical stressors, but all three of those sources of stress are filling your bucket all the time. And when your bucket fills up and it overflows, well, that might be the day that you first start feeling fatigued, or that might be the day that your immune system first starts presenting antibodies against the thyroid, or against the joints, a rheumatoid factor, or against the nucleus where your DNA is, an ANA, anti-nuclear antibody. So the bucket fills up. So when we talk about stress and stressors, stress isn't always emotional stress, like your job and your bills and your fights and just the go of life today. That's a huge, huge part of it, of course. But your stress could be toxins. Your stress could be an old injury that you had years ago that's still creating this stress response in your body. And those stressors, those environmental factors, those toxins, all those things can lead to inflammation, can trigger these genes, and can fuel autoimmune disease. So when we talk about fueling autoimmune disease, it's a perfect transition to my next analogy or my next metaphor. When I say that the immune system attacks the thyroid or the brain or the joints or the skin or the gut or the pancreas or whatever, it's sending inflammation to those joints, inflammatory cytokines, interleukin 6, Th17, all these interleukin 1, TNF alpha, different inflammatory cytokines that damage tissue. They quite literally damage tissue. But inflammation, the word itself makes you think inflame. It's like a fire. So the next analogy that I want to share, the next metaphor that I want to share, is that everybody is on this spectrum. And it is a spectrum. And so if you are probably not if you're watching this, if you got a 10-year-old kid at home, well, they're probably on this spectrum. If we ran a full lab panel on them, they probably have autoimmunity. I think that everybody today, if we ran extensive enough panels, everybody has autoimmunity against something. But you might be over here. So this is a spectrum of fire, right? And so fire is fire is fire is fire. But you can have a match, and it's a small fire. You can have a campfire, right? Or you can have your house on fire. And each one of those is fire, and one can lead to the other, and one can be brought back down to the other, but they're all along the same spectrum. And one is going to do considerably more damage than another. If you're at this end of the spectrum, you might burn your finger. something like that, or you could drop it on the floor, create a bigger fire. But from just this alone, not very damaging. Now this one, if you're out in the woods, it could catch fire. It could easily turn into a bigger problem, or you could dump a bucket of water on it. It could go either way. But once again, the destructive capabilities of a campfire are more destructive than a match. Then lastly, let's look at your house on fire. Well, that's going to be a lot of destruction and a lot of irreversible destruction. So with autoimmune diseases, they might start here when you're a kid. Then you go through college, you eat like crap, you drink a bunch, you know, for me, my goodness, like Wendy's and you know, that was about Wendy's and Sonic and just beer and just, you know, a horrible diet through my college years. So maybe your match turns to a campfire. Well, if you keep living that lifestyle, you keep doing the same things, it's going to turn into a house on fire. So if you continue to pour fuel on the fire, the damage just gets worse and worse. The inflammation gets worse and worse. And eventually, you're not going to be able to reverse that damage. You light a house on fire, you are not going to be able to fully fix that. You might be able to salvage some things. You might be able to save it if you catch it in time. But if you don't catch it in time, if you just let that fire run rampant, that thing is going to burn to the ground. And that's a perfect analogy for our bodies and for our health. So the next analogy or metaphor that I want to share is this. And so what I want everybody to do is, and this is whether you're sitting here live right now at whatever time, or if you're watching it, you know, the next day or whatever, everybody do this with me because you'll feel it. Okay, so take out your left hand, put it in front of you. Take your right hand, take all 5 fingers, put your nails down on your hand and start scratching, okay? All 5 nails, everybody doing it? So I want you to keep scratching for a minute, keep scratching for an hour, keep scratching for a day, keep scratching for a week, keep scratching for a month, keep scratching for a year. You guys getting the point. If you're scratching this all the time, think about what's going to happen. Even after this first minute, it's going to get pink, puffy, inflamed. You're starting that inflammation, but it's down here, right? It's just a small, slight amount of inflammation, but you keep scratching, then what's going to happen? You're going to damage that skin. You're going to eventually draw blood. And you keep scratching for a month or a year nonstop, all 5 fingernails, you're eventually going to damage that tissue to where it's irreversible. Scar tissue is going to come in form, it's going to get calloused, and you're going to continue damaging it. So what is the solution? If you're inflaming a tissue and you're inflaming your immune system and you just keep scratching, the answer is stop scratching. So what are these 5 fingers that are scratching? And if you got the email, then you already have this image of what the 5 things are. So number 1 is your food. So if you're scratching, the solution is to stop scratching. Starts with your food. Stop scratching with your food. It's one of the biggest triggers because you're doing it 3 times a day. You're constantly pouring fuel on that inflammatory fire. So there's a lot within that. You know, I'm telling you to stop scratching like it's a real easy step. There's a lot in that. So you might need a food sensitivities panel to see exactly which foods. You might need to follow an elimination diet or an autoimmune paleo diet. You know, we posted a post this week on the autoimmune paleo diet that went viral. You know, for us, you know, we're used to like 30 likes per post, and this one got 300 likes on the autoimmune paleo diet. I have a podcast about how to do an elimination diet or an autoimmune paleo protocol. We just posted that one also, the link to the podcast, but you can listen to that. And what that is it's a fairly restrictive diet where you pull out all the foods that are pouring fuel on the fire. Because you gotta understand that even if eggs are a superfood, if they're triggering an immune response in you, you're pouring fuel on that match. You're pouring gas on that match, and that little fire is going to become a bigger fire. I have another podcast called 7 Food Additives that are causing leaky gut and autoimmune disease. That might be a good one for somebody to go out and download and listen to. And it talks about all the different food additives that are in our processed food. So the first step is to just start eating real food, get rid of anything processed. But then even within the real food, the food sensitivities might be a thing. So you have to cut that out. Or maybe you're going to try a gluten-free, casein-free diet. Absolutely, absolutely, you should. But there are other triggers too. So looking into that elimination diet or autoimmune paleo diet. So you stopped your food. Number 2 is toxins. So what do you have to do with that one? Well, you might have to change out your personal care products. You might have to start using something like Pure Haven, a very clean personal care product company that we carry in our store. You might have to switch out your cookware. You might have to start using a shower filter, or give your kids a bath filter, or use a water filter to filter your water. But you stop scratching with the food, and you're still scratching here, but you're down 20%. And then you stop scratching with toxins. Maybe you need to detoxify. Maybe you need to do something more intense like our true cellular detox. Maybe you have heavy metal toxicity, a huge, huge thing, really, really hard to get over. If you've got heavy metal toxicity, you change all these other things in your life and you're still scratching. And that's a gnarly scratch with a big sharp nail. So that's something to be concerned about, is you have to remove those toxins. You have to detoxify your life, and you have to detoxify your body. Make sure your body's able to methylate, make sure your body's able to clear out those toxins, your liver's functioning well, et cetera, et cetera. Something like true cellular detox really, really, really gets at the root cause of a lot of these toxic issues. It's not like a 10-day detox. It's 3 months of upregulating cellular function so that you can really get rid of some of these toxins. But that's number 3 is your toxins. Or number 2, excuse me. Number 3 is stress. Okay, and we already talked about that with the bucket. So maybe you're changed your food. Maybe you detox, or you have a perfectly clean life and clean diet, but maybe you're stressed. Maybe you have a high stress job. Maybe you have a high stress relationship. Maybe you have physical stress, like we mentioned, from sitting too long and you're getting a stress response, or you have a past car accident, or you have something going on in your life that's stressful. So maybe you start putting the phone down at night and just relaxing a little bit more. Maybe you turn the TV off. Maybe you read a book. Maybe you go for a walk. Maybe you have a talk with somebody, have some actual interpersonal relationship, and get off of Facebook for a minute. Maybe you start meditating. Maybe you go back to praying or doing a journal. Maybe you start taking something like an adaptogenic herb, or maybe you need some adrenal support or adrenal profiling, which we're going to get to hormones in a second, that's more hormones. But you start to remove these stressors and you take away one of your scratches. Now you're only left with 2 big scratches. Now, what can happen is some of you have autoimmune disease. You've Googled it. You know everything about your disease. You're in part of the Facebook groups and all the support and everything. You've tried this diet. And my point is that you're still not getting the results that you want. Well, guess what? Something's still scratching you. If you've tried everything, something is still scratching you. So with all these, I think they go in pretty good order. That you have to start with this one, next with the toxins, change your lifestyle, change your stress, but then 4 is bugs. I also have to mention, I meant to say it at the beginning, but this is huge thanks to Dr. Tom Colton. Dr. Tom Colton is who taught me this. He's a great instructor, functional medicine doctor, functional neurologist, and he's the one that taught me this metaphor. So I just certainly want to give him credit. But your bugs are, my hand is really red already. Your bugs are number 4. So do you have an imbalanced gut microbiome? How's your microbiome? How healthy are your bugs? Do you have H. pylori overgrowth? Do you have candida? or a yeast overgrowth? Do you have SIBO or small intestinal bacterial overgrowth? Do you have Klebsiella? Do you have herpes virus? Do you have Epstein-Barr virus? Do you have Lyme disease? Do you have autoimmunity against these bugs too? Do you have any bugs that need to be addressed? If you've worked on the first three and something's still scratching you, a lot of times it can be that one. Bugs. You have to look at bugs sometimes. And then number 5, lastly, hormones. Okay, so that's things like, how is your thyroid puzzle look? And we call it a puzzle, as I always said, a thyroid puzzle, because the medical system tries to solve a 10-piece puzzle with 2 pieces. And so the thyroid is a puzzle and it's got a lot of pieces. But if I gave you a puzzle and said, okay, put this together, and I only gave you 2 of the pieces and it's supposed to be 10, you're going to have a hard time putting that puzzle together, right? So your thyroid, your adrenals, like I mentioned, maybe you have some stress response, some HPA axis dysfunction that's throwing everything off in your body, fueling inflammation, fueling more cytokine surges. And those cytokines, because of your autoimmunity and because of your flags, are going to your thyroid or to your joints, and you have what's called a flare-up. Maybe you have a testosterone estrogen imbalance, which can absolutely flare up inflammation in certain directions, but maybe your hormones need to be looked at. So these are the 5 things that if you have autoimmune disease, let me just recap. So first off, autoimmune means that your body's attacking itself. It can be attacking the thyroid. We call that Hashimoto's or Graves'. It can be attacking the brain. We call that MS or Alzheimer's. Now, it can be attacking the joints. That's rheumatoid arthritis. Attacking the skin. That's eczema, psoriasis. Attacking the gut. That's irritable bowel, inflammatory bowel diseases, Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis. It can be attacking the pancreas. But the crazy, crazy, crazy thing about autoimmune disease is it's all the same thing. It's just attacking different areas. And each person is different, right? Everybody's unique, so each case is handled differently. But when you zoom out and you look at it, that all autoimmune diseases are the same general thing. And that's what we're going to talk about next week too, is that they all have the same solution. Now, once again, each person is unique, but if you look at these 2 targets, they all have very similar solutions. But that's what an autoimmune disease is when your immune system loses the ability to distinguish self from non-self, and it begins to attack self, which it's not supposed to do. There are 3 things that are necessary, like a 3-legged stool, necessary for autoimmune disease. Without any one of them, if you have horrible genes and you have horrible stressors and you don't have intestinal permeability, chances are good that you will not develop autoimmune disease. You have to have all 3 of these. So they are your genes. Your genes can absolutely load the gun. Your genes can predispose you to a degree. Your gut, a leaky gut or intestinal permeability. Like I said, we're going to talk about that one more next week, about how that happens, and kind of draw that out up here on the whiteboard. And you have to have stressors, or you have to have your environment. Your environment has to pull the trigger. And these are the things that fill our bucket, that include things like, I mean, it's all 5 of those. It's our foods, it's our chemicals, it's our emotional stressors, it might be your bugs. All those things, all those stressors fill the bucket and cause autoimmune disease, which is an immune system dysfunction. When you have this inflammatory cascade in autoimmune disease, when you have this inflammation is a spectrum like fire. So it can be a small fire right here, might be like when autoimmune disease first begins. It's not going to be detected. It's not going to be causing you any issues. It's just that your immune system has started flagging certain tissues so that it can begin attacking it. So in like Hashimoto's is probably the best example that people know about. These are called your thyroid antibodies. And all of these, you're going to have antibodies for all of these things. You're going to have an IgG, IgA response against them, an immunoglobulin response. And these antibodies just tag which tissues to attack. So this match can turn into this fire with the wrong lifestyle. If you keep scratching with these 5 things, this is going to turn into this, is going to turn into your house on fire. So when we went through those 5 things, we put them down on our hand. My hand is already pink and inflamed, and I don't have many nails. But you keep scratching. Remember I said, and try it, scratch for a minute. Scratch it for a minute, scratch it for an hour, scratch it for a day, scratch it for a week. Some of you have been scratching for decades. Some of you have been scratching, you don't even know it. Some of you have no idea that you're scratching all 5. Some of you, your pinky nail is really, really sharp and edgy and aggravated. Some of your other nails might be a little bit smoother. They're not doing as much damage. Some of you are really gnawing at your hand. Some of you are just mildly scratching every single day, but it's causing tissue damage. It's causing this flame to get bigger and bigger and bigger to the point where it's going to do irreversible damage. So what are the 5 things? Foods, toxins, stress, bugs, and hormones. And once again, thanks to Dr. Tom Colton for that analogy, that metaphor. I switched around your 5 a little bit, but thanks, Dr. Tom. So that is the end of our presentation today. I'm going to sit down and take any questions if we have any. But otherwise, thanks for tuning in. Next week, we're going to talk about autoimmune diseases and just dive into this a little bit further. Talk about leaky gut, talk about how that starts with the loss of oral tolerance, and talk about the immune system dysfunction and how you can bring balance to the immune system. Because I hope it's making sense to everybody that just because it's attacking your thyroid doesn't mean you need a thyroid supplement. Just because it's attacking your joints doesn't mean you need a joint supplement, or attacking your brain doesn't mean you need a brain supplement. Now you might need to rebuild those tissues if there's been damage, but what you need to do is you need to get the immune system balanced. That's the first thing, and you need to fix your leaky gut. That's what we're going to talk about next week. So let me pull the camera down. I'll sit down, see if we have any questions. Last week we did not, so maybe I'll go home. Oh, you see my ghetto lighting system? Part of it's less ghetto. Let's get that out of there. Okay, let me scroll up here, see if there are any questions. What are some common things that we may notice with our kids that would warn us that their bucket is getting full? Great question, but symptoms. I mean symptoms of, especially in the autoimmune context of things, if they're getting acne, if they're getting skin issues, the skin's a first one, especially for kids a lot of times. They're getting any joint pain, would be a little less common with kids. Any digestive symptoms would be huge. Any bloating, any gas, any constipation, any diarrhea, that'd be a pretty big red flag. But it's impossible to know when the bucket gets full. That's the problem, is that it fills drip by drip. So especially with kids, when they're like 35 and they get diagnosed with X, Y, or Z symptoms. So you never really know when the bucket is full. You just do everything that you can to not let it fill and to keep it emptying. There's some other good comments on here, but no other questions. So we're gonna end this live video. Yeah, Shane, and huge thank you, Shane, to Shane Brewer from Portrait Life Photography for my non-ghetto lighting system. That's over here. That's a lot more professional, that he helped me out with. So huge thank you, Portrait Life Photography, Shane Brewer. All right, that is it. We got 18 people still on, but we're ending it right now. Thank you, guys.